Dr. Shawn Giammattei, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks a lot. Good to be here.
Yeah, I just had a lesson from you in how to pronounce your name, and because the spelling is reminiscent of the actor, and so
Yeah, it
so
often up there.
yeah, yeah. So I recently interviewed our mutual friend, uh, also family therapist, Dr. Keith Sutton. And he recommended that I follow up with you. He said, you got to talk to this guy. He'll give you a great interview, and so he thought I should follow up with you, especially as someone who's doing important work in the field, especially in those who are in the gender diverse community. And you've helped make me aware that there's a lot of sensitivity to language in the gender diverse community. Now, I'm a cisgender old guy and, and relatively new to the gender diversity discussion. So I hope you'll overlook any awkwardness on my part or little
Mhm.
slip ups that I make. And so, what drew you to this work?
To work with the trans community in particular, the gender diverse community.
Well, both.
Well, several things drew me to the work. First off, I was doing my residency at Kaiser, and the at that time I was one of the few people there who knew anything about gender and family work. And so I ended up getting families coming from all over Northern California,
Uh-huh.
very far to get to work with me. And at the time, I'm also transgender, and I was going through my own transition. And my therapist had said, you should think about doing this work because there's nobody doing this. And I had originally wanted to have nothing to do with working in a field that was too close to home, uh,
Yeah, right.
because it just sort of followed me, and this is where I landed. And it's actually really beautiful to be in this space with the families and with kids and adults as far as that goes. So.
Yeah. Now, I understand that you're a person who identifies as transgender. And so, what can you share with us about your own gender journey? Because
Yeah.
you mentioned that you were reluctant to kind of come out in a way, and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
in this arena and this very, podcasting and so on is really a big,
Yeah. I let's see. Well, just to say a bit about me as far as I identify, I don't actually identify as transgender, although I have a transgender history. I very much identify as male. And so just as far as languaging goes around that, that would be more how I would see myself. There are some people in the community who do see themselves as trans or trans man or trans woman or that kind of stuff. And
yeah,
for me, that's my internal sense of self is as male, but I do have a transgender history. So I'll identify as a male who was assigned female at birth is one way that I could say
yeah,
that.
yeah,
So, yeah, that I have a history and I understand the experience of going through this. And also I would say that every person's experience is very unique. Mine actually started, and part of what actually got me into doing this work, um, at that intersection, I was pretty what we would call stealth. I was not out about being trans. Like when I was going
right.
to residency, they didn't know my my history. They knew I was part of something in the LGBT community because I had a lot of knowledge about stuff, but nobody ever really knew. And I have a female partner. And actually, that's one of the beautiful things about my journey is that we went through this together. We've been together for almost 34 years. And so,
Yeah, wow.
so we went through this after we'd been together for quite a while. And, but I was not out because I didn't want to be known as a transgender therapist. I wanted to be known as a family therapist because that was where my
Yeah,
love family work and not to have that sort of tag following me. But after the Pulse nightclub shooting, that really hit me hard. And when that happened, I realized, and the way it sort of got washed over as not being a gay club primarily people of color. There's so much about it that was very upsetting to me that I just couldn't be silent anymore. So I made it
Yeah.
to be more out about who I am and to use, that as part of, when I'm talking to people and I'm sharing and I'm teaching, because I used to teach and not share that stuff. And what I realized is when I don't bring my whole self into it, it's a little flat. So that's
Yeah. Yeah.
one thing when
So,
people,
how old were you when you first realized that there was this something different about you?
yeah, well, three was when I told my family,
Three,
yeah,
three?
was
Wow.
but that's not when I transitioned. So I was three. I'm also 60 years old this next week, actually. And so, the world was very different then. And, my parents did what most parents do. They told me, oh, no, honey, you're not. You've got these parts. So you're actually a girl. And logically that made sense to me, although that's not how I felt. But what
Yeah.
I did was I all went underground and I also had a very tight connection with my Italian roots, and there was a thing about familia and the family being so important, and I didn't want to mess that up. I was trying to figure out how to be a good kid,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so it really went underground, and it went underground, and and actually in going underground, I got into a lot of trouble and had a lot of problems. I'm lucky I survived to adulthood, um, trying to just be okay with myself in the world. And then, when I was 34, I had what I call an epiphany moment, which everybody has at some point. It's not usually where the journey starts, but it's the moment where we realize, oh, this is a trans experience and I need to do something about it. And actually, I did what most people do when they first find out. I tried to shut it down. And
Yeah.
it took about another year before I was like, okay, I can't shut this down. I can't put it away. I can't make it go away. And I was starting to get depressed and wasn't willing to go into that space. So then I started exploring the journey of where does this need to go for me? And I really didn't want to transition. That wasn't, I had learned how to survive by becoming an academic and I had become successful and I was afraid I would lose everything. And I really didn't want to transition if I didn't have to, but I allowed
Yeah. Right.
and the journey took me here, which is, you know, completely, I walk through the world now. Nobody knows that I'm trans. I just look
Yeah.
like an older guy.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Right.
and
We're in such a politically it's so politicized right now, and what feels like a very dangerous moment. And I'm wondering, uh, how are you? Maybe you're lucky to live in the Bay Area. I don't know if that makes the situation better for you, less dangerous. What's your safety meter say at this point?
yeah, I would say no, not less dangerous. I mean, it is less dangerous to live in the Bay Area, but to be out as a provider of care to youth in this current political climate is very dangerous. And many of us who are doing this work get regular death threats and things like that. So there's a bit of having to protect yourself
Yeah.
out there that you didn't have to think about. As a therapist, you go out there, you just want to help people. You're not thinking about becoming a target.
Right.
And there is a piece of that that is a part of doing this work right now. And as a person, generally I'm pretty safe in the world if nobody knows I'm trans, but
Yeah.
if into other areas like the political climate is so hard for the families I work with, so hard for everybody. It has been a dangerous world all along for trans people, but it's kind of gone up a few notches. And like if I was to go to Florida at this point with the laws that they have there, it's actually considered a do not travel state for the trans and particularly or the queer community right now around the world because it's so dangerous. If I was to go there, given their new laws that they're passing, if they knew my assigned sex, I could be considered frauding, and I think they're considering it a felony to have my driver's license say male on it, right? And
Wow.
so there are various things like that are happening around the country that make it actually hard. I have kids who are trying to figure out where to go to college, and half of the country is not available to them to go to
Wow.
college.
Yeah, I can really understand that. It feels like a dangerous time for all of us. All of us who have any sort of liberal tendencies. it feels like it's the selection that we're coming
It's,
up into is,
I
yeah,
it's a hard time for everybody right now because we none of us feel comfortable in such a divided country,
right.
no matter where
Yeah,
you. So it's hard. I love,
yeah.
I don't know if you know the work that Bill Doherty is doing and their group, the Brave Angels, but they're actually doing some amazing work on talking across difference with um, people from very different political backgrounds, particularly they're looking at politics and different issues and having people come together and talk and actually have dialogues rather than just fighting and deciding you're this or you're that based on what the media says around things. So
I,
it's,
I think one of my friends recently, maybe I don't know that organization or the guy's name. Um, is there an organization that does trainings? I think I was into a website and I kind of looked into that. What's the name of the organization for our audience?
yeah, Braver Angels. Um,
Braver Angels. Great.
yeah, I've recently learned more and more about what they're doing, and I really love what I hear because it's bringing folks together in a way that, we can learn to respect each other and love each other, even if we disagree on particular topics, and actually be
Yeah.
honest about what our positions are rather than having other people tell people. So I know a lot of conservative folks have a very distorted view of what liberal people think, and liberal people have a very distorted view of what conservative people think. And certainly it shows up in this arena as well. So
Right. Right.
and Bill's a family. That's why his name came up for that around that. That's why. Yeah.
So what are the main difficulties that transgender people face today? Now, this may be obvious because it is so political right now. And, we're hearing about in athletics, for example, that it's a big issue right there.
Mhm.
Um, but on your day-to-day work that you do, what are you experiencing as the main concerns or issues that need to be dealt with?
Well, I wear a lot of different hats. So clinically in California, it's a whole lot different than it is in some of the other states. But I also do coaching and various things around the country and internationally. So things are different depending upon where you're living. All the same, if you look at the US trans survey is a really good one. There was one that came out in 2015. There's one that was just released, but they haven't released all the data yet. So we're waiting to find out what it says. But their original version of that was titled Injustice at Every Turn because it doesn't matter what aspect of life you're talking about, transgender people are experiencing a negative impact. You talk about housing, work, school, just walking down the street, the level of minority stress and discrimination and oppression and all that kind of stuff is going on. PTSD as a result of all of those things and an ongoing
Yeah, yeah,
things. That's going on. Healthcare is huge. So, go there. But what we're seeing also happening in some states across the country is the erasure of trans people. Basically, there's a lot of people out there who don't believe that the transgender people actually exist or that we're real. They just see it as pathology, and and they're trying to just eliminate all of that. And the effects of that on healthcare. It's like what they did with LGBT folks around conversion therapy. They're trying to do with trans folks now and LGBT folks around that of trying to convert them to be cisgender.
right.
And no data out there shows that you can actually do that with anybody, their identity. You can get them to change their behavior, but that doesn't change who they are. And and so there's all of that stuff. There's just so much going on that's just impacting you as a transgender person walking through the world. It feels like you're getting blasted from every corner. And I will say that it's not just trans folks themselves, but it's their whole system, their family, because families are on the journey as well with them, and they're impacted by all of these things that are going on around them as well, especially in states that are trying to take away parents' rights to decide what's best for their kids. There's so
Yeah.
much. It's like
Oh, yeah. Yeah, really.
a lot of stress. I would say a lot of minority stress and a lot to deal with in all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So your work has really expanded into working with um, people on in a variety of gender concerns or self-questioning, not necessarily transgender, but somewhere on the LGBTQ curious scale. And so a lot of what you're doing really is leadership. You mentioned you're going around to different places in the country and different places in the world as a leader, and you do online training of
Mhm.
family therapists to teach them how to be people who can work with gender diverse people.
Mhm.
And what are the issues that you wrestle with there in terms of trainees and so on? And who are the people that sign up for this training?
Yeah, I center myself as a family therapist first, and then,
Yes.
specializing also as a gender specialist. So I do a lot of educating. I work for WPATH as well as on their faculty, but I also teach in graduate schools around just general therapy and LGBT affirming therapy as well, couples and family work, all that kind of stuff. So when I started doing more trainings out there, and became an APAC provider, so I could actually offer more to psychologists and actually everybody across the board, just to try and help people get what they need and get the training. What I found is that the people who come to my trainings, some people just don't know. They end up with a trans person on their caseload, or a parent or a family member on their caseload, and it's all new to them. And what we do as therapists, we realize when we become aware, just like everybody else, that we need information. And so they start seeking information. And one of the things I've done in my work over the last few years is I love development, like thinking from a developmental perspective.
Yeah.
So we've created a gender journey map for families, and we've also created one for clinicians. And what their gender journey is when when they first learn about this stuff and realize they need to know something, to where they go if they become competent, really confident in doing the work, or maybe even a gender specialist. So there's like a journey that we all go on. And what I see my work as is taking people from where they are to the next phases of where they want to be on that journey. Some people want to be specialists. Some people just want to know that they're doing really good work with the
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
Uh, so I help people with that. And I would say that they come in two ways. Sometimes they just don't know. That's one way, but actually, so three ways. Another is that they are seasoned family therapists and they don't know about gender stuff, and they realize that they need to know more about that. And
Right.
in trying to learn the gender piece of it. Then I have a lot of gender specialists who are really good and they understand the gender stuff, and they don't understand the family part. And some of the biggest struggles when I do surveys of therapists out there, when I ask them where they struggle the most, it's working with families, especially families who are unsupportive, and trying to figure out how to do that. And so a lot of my work is helping bridge that intersection between those two. And that's been sort of where I situate myself in that. There are a lot of people who do individual work, and I believe that no matter how old you are, you have family, you have community, you have a system around you, and we
Right. Right.
and we have a tendency. And we used to do this with gay and lesbian folks. Like somehow, when you show up in a therapist's office, it's just you. This whole idea about you, but it's not. It's this whole system, and the more we're held by a supportive system, by our families and our community or our family of choice, the better we do. We're better off together with a group of people that love us. So helping
Yeah.
system show up in the best way possible not only helps the trans person, but it also helps the whole system, because regardless of what you do, when you're on a journey, the family's on a journey as well. You can't separate the two unless you ostracize yourselves. And even so, you've made a decision to ostracize yourself because somebody's on a gender journey. So um, that's
And
a
I understand that you're very flexible in terms of how you work with people, that you like to transition between maybe seeing the IP, the identified problem person, uh, one-on-one, but then you'll transition maybe to the family or to a larger group that's a larger group of stakeholders. Say a bit about that.
Yeah, I think in this work, there's several things to know about the work. One, you cannot sit alone in your office and just work with one person because there is a whole system involved, and those people are big players in how well somebody does. So if you consider the IP the transgender person, which it isn't always, sometimes the IP is the whole family. They come in that way.
Yeah, yeah,
But if that's the person who shows up more often than not, because they need maybe a letter for medical care or they need just help navigating and figuring out what they need to do, it's really important for us to be able to work with the systems around that person who's in their world. We also need to be able to get out when we're working with kids. You can't work with kids and not work with families. You need to have the parents involved, not just as collateral, but they also have their journey. So helping them on that path is important. It's actually one of the reasons why I started the Trans Family Alliance to help parents navigate their gender journey along the way, especially if they aren't working with a therapist to do some of that stuff or in collaboration with their therapist to do that stuff. Um, so I think as clinicians, thinking about things in that much broader way is very important. We're also having to deal with medical teams, other kinds of pieces. So when we're in this world, we're in a world that's a medical issue as well, more often than not. Well, it depends on who's coming into your office and need medical care.
yeah,
If they
yeah.
do, also, you're working not only with a medical team, you may be helping them get access to resources. You're doing something that looks a little more like social work. Um,
Yes, yes.
coaching realm, but it's bringing the whole family around or the whole system around that person to help make sure they're supported because it's really hard to do this all by yourself. And so a lot of that work for me is yes, I will work with, like, say a family comes in, they bring in their kid, my kid's having this gender issue, can you help them? And I'm like, yeah, but I don't work with just the kid. So
Yeah,
I'll spend some time with your kid, but I'm also going to spend some time with you. And then sometimes I find parents are really struggling, and the struggle they're having is harming their kid because they're saying and doing things that is just really hurtful. And they need to have that space to do that. So I'll separate them and I'll have the parents go through their own process around that. And I do family work with them all. So because I also find that parents need to hear from their kids where they're going. They need to really understand their child's journey to be able to make decisions. And then, sometimes it's with extended relatives, siblings are really important in this whole process. It's the whole family.
yeah,
Siblings get left by the wayside. They can be the best supports or the worst enemies. So we want to know all of those pieces. And so I'll work with whatever part of the system needs to come in. I've had kids bring in their friends, as a part of
yeah,
that's part of their family system in their way, and adults as well. And we also have to expand beyond this notion of a very heteronormative family. I have couples that come in that start opening up their relationship and have other partners and things like that, and how we think about it in a more polyamorous sort of way or consensual non-monogamy. So there's various ways around that. And when it comes back to thinking about clinicians and where they struggle, it's sometimes getting out of those boxes and understand
yeah,
how much they need to sort of open their minds to various different ways that family can exist and be. And sometimes we do struggle if we have a particular belief system. And that's true whether you're cisgender or transgender. Like I had my own biases that came in. And in fact, I'm doing a workshop coming up called Unpacking Gender and understanding the bias in the therapeutic relationship. And I do that once a year in part because that's so important for us all to do that kind of work, for parents to understand that stuff, but also for clinicians to know how our own story and our own narrative feels what we see as possible.
yeah,
Um, and I had my own biases that actually limited what I thought was possible for some of my families based on my personal experience. And in doing my own work, I've learned to open that up and recognize when those things are happening. So I think that's all part of the work we got to do is the self of the therapist work, as I would say. So, or as
yeah. And when I went to your website, I see that you're not working alone. You've got a staff of, I don't know how many, but uh, looks like maybe they're people with social work background and so on, because it's so relevant to this broad range of services that you're offering.
Yeah, well, one of the things that happened to me in COVID, I think I went a little crazy actually. I started two businesses and expanded my practice out of being just so part of it was I couldn't meet the needs of the families. I had 40 families on my wait list and I couldn't figure out how to help them. And so I started the Trans Family Alliance for parents to help create a space for them while they were waiting to get in with a clinician. And I was hoping I could find them somebody, but there were no clinicians out there that had openings that I could send people to. So people were just sitting on long wait lists. And I wasn't the only clinician having that problem. I was talking to other colleagues around the country, the same issue. And so I thought, well, if we can just have a space for parents, that would be great. But it didn't work to get people off my wait list. And so I then thought, well, okay, I'm going to create more trainings and we'll get more clinicians out there doing this work and we'll get more, then there'll be
Yeah.
to send people to, and that'll be awesome, which I agree with. It can be awesome if we get more and more people out there. But it still didn't work to get people off my wait list. And then finally I had a colleague who took on an associate and was training them in gender affirming care. And I realized, oh, I could do that. And so I started first with independent contractors, and then I had a student come and say, I really want to get my hours. Will you do this with me? And I didn't want to do that and take on employees and do all that, but I agreed to. And then it sort of blew up from there that
Yeah.
I have this full group of associates and independent contractors who are doing gender affirming care, who actually all go through my coaching program. So they're trained in all of this as well and trained and supervised along the way. So it's been that actually helped get people off my wait list. That was the final thing. So that's how I ended up with so many people in Quest Family Therapy. But which is very different than the Gender Health Training Institute, which is where my training and coaching programs are. And the Trans Family Alliance is part of that arm of business. So yeah,
Yeah, you've got sort of an octopus going here because you've got all these different initiatives, and
I have a great team, and my team really wants to expand into doing more diversity and equity inclusion trainings for companies and for mental health and medical, maybe even insurance stuff like that. So I've said I'll support them as they start to build that. So we may be launching another octopus arm in there, but
yeah, right, right,
yeah.
right. Um, and let's see, what else did I want to ask you about this? Oh, what about for licensure, uh, people, there are these to get relicensed as a psychologist or as a marriage and family therapist or in other disciplines also, they have their licensing things. And is gender sensitivity on the to-do list for any of those licenses or not? And should it be? I think I'm pretty sure you're going to say, yeah, it should be.
I would say that I think in some states there is some diversity training that people need to do to get to renew their licenses or at least or a one-shot deal like they do around suicidality, things like that. I would say it is impossible for clinicians to work out there and not end up with an LGBT person uh, on their caseload. And we're going to see more and more trans folks. There aren't a lot of people are like, oh, they want to go see a trans therapist. There aren't that many out here. There aren't very many. Most people are going to go see a cisgender therapist, and you may end up with somebody who really has a beautiful relationship with you and comes out on your, and then what do? You can't just send them on, say, oh, no, this is something I can't deal with here. I'm going to send you over here. That ruptures this attachment that they've built with you, and that's not okay. So I think that it should be. I mean, I'm kind of going outside of your question, but it really should be something that is required on some level. I mean, I don't know, requirements are a little tough, but when I teach my graduate students and they go through I have a semester long course in transgender mental health, and they go through that course, which is actually not the deepest dive because we do a very broad brush over everything. All of them are like, we never get this. And if you talk to professionals in their training, they never got it in their training. Um, there's a lot of nuances to doing the work, and it's important to know. And all my graduate students say this absolutely should be required as part of our training. So,
Yeah,
given their response to that and what they feel like they didn't get, and especially if you're not getting it in graduate school, unless you were lucky enough to go to one of the 5 grad schools that actually do have a program in that, it's really important that clinicians have at least some base knowledge in that, because you can do a lot of harm if you don't. And there's a lot of misinformation out there and disinformation, and there's a lot of data out there that's being thrown around that sounds good when you look at it on the surface, but when you really take a deeper dive, you realize they're using stuff from the 80s and not using the current diagnoses as a way of describing something that's actually not happening today, but or to debunk it in some way. And it's a misuse of
Yeah.
old data and what we would call disinformation. It's not even misinformation. They're just, not telling the truth about what's happening. But it's easy to get captured by that stuff, especially if you have biases and don't understand from the beginning what this is about.
Sure.
Read that and go, oh my God. And even parents, like if you look around the country and you look that there's been 22 states that have passed bans on gender affirming care in their legislatures, that's almost half of our country. And if you look at that, parents go, well, geez, if they're doing that everywhere, it must be true, right? And
Uh-huh. Yeah.
same group that keeps going to every state, and it's just, they almost like a boilerplate thing that they go through the legislature around,
Right.
and they're using people who are have never seen a transgender person, who say that they're not biased, and yet they keep showing up with data that's so old, and it doesn't, and they ignore all the current data, and they basically say, oh, it's activist researchers that are doing this. But it's, and then you have this full support of all the medical communities, except for a few that sound like they're very important communities, but they're actually not. They're fairly new, and um, they're funded by very conservative anti-LGBT groups. And
Yeah.
so it's hard as a clinician when you're really busy out there and it's not where you spend most of your time to really unpack what's happening. And it can be very easy to believe some of the stuff. And the kinds of experiences that transgender people will describe and family members will describe of going to a therapist who doesn't know this stuff, and the kinds of things that they'll tell them to do is horrible, and it actually creates an experience where people stop seeking care, or they only go because they have to, and then they don't trust you at all. And so it makes it really hard for all of us to do the work, because people are coming in scared to even talk to us to get
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
Are there any movies, TV shows, etc., that you feel do an excellent job of communicating some of the key issues?
There's a lot of them out there. It's funny. I do a monthly movie night for the Trans Family Alliance for the parents, and we've been going through a ton of documentaries. And it kind of depends on how you want to view things. So if you want to look at the um, impact of just the media messaging and stuff like that, I think oh, what was the name of it? I'm gonna blank on it, but there was a documentary that was, oh, Disclosure, was put out by a lot of trans people of color, talking about Hollywood and how Hollywood has portrayed trans people over time, and with that experience,
Right. Yeah.
that can be helpful. It's hard to watch for a lot of people. Even the gender revolution, which is it's a few years ago now, that Katie Couric did on trans youth and talking about what's happening. It was not just trans youth, but they did a good job with that documentary. There's quite a few new ones out there. I mean, there's some great just personal stories there's some about athletics, where young people who are athletes talk about being athletes. And yeah, so there are many. You can do a kind of a search. You can do the best of. Some of them talk about the experience. I mean, Pose is one of those that's been a really good. It's um, a show. I don't remember what is it, Netflix or something like that, but that it has a lot to do with the documentary Paris is Burning, and about the ballroom culture in New York City for trans people of color, particularly trans women. It follows them a lot, and just understanding sort of the experience and what's going on with folks in different marginalized and minoritized communities. And I think that's an important factor to also understand, is that the experience of a white transgender person in the world is a whole lot different than somebody who's a person of color. And you start adding other minoritized status, and the discrimination, oppression, violence, and all the rest of that becomes exponential. So
Yeah,
it's the, and that's right now we're talking, the whole community is grieving over the loss of a non-binary kid who was attacked in a bathroom, got in a fight, and don't know exactly what happened, but it appears that they hit their head and ended up a day later dying from. Um, we don't know whether it was from the injuries of that, but it looks like that. All the
Wh-
same, it's another
where
example.
did where
And
did that happen?
in Oklahoma,
Oklahoma. Yeah,
yeah, a 16-year-old kid was attacked by three girls in the bathroom. They were in a fight with each other. But the end result was a kid ends up dying, and it looks like the hard to know, but it looks like there's a lot of cover up. I mean, a lot of stuff that's coming out. I don't say
yeah,
cover that what they're saying is very similar to what they did at the Pulse nightclub shooting. They started making it about something it's not, or saying it's not really this, or, I've heard some people blame the kid, like it's his fault he died, and some
sure.
because he threw water on the girls who then beat him up or them up. I'm sorry, I don't even know. I think their pronouns are they, them. Um, so, those are those kinds of things are coming up, and there's vigils going on around the country right now because everybody's really upset about this happening and the way it's being treated. And so we'll be watching those kinds of things, but um, and parents are
Um,
because
did
you
did you- did you start to give us a statistic? I think you talked about, you said there was a survey that had come out, but
yeah. Well, there's a survey, the U.S. Trans Survey, which
okay.
there's been three of them. The first one is in 2009. The second one came out 2016, and they just did one that was done in 2022. The data is just now coming out, so we don't have all the data yet, especially on the mental health stuff. One of the things that they did show, though, is that because there's this belief that people regret transitioning. Like there's a lot, very loud minority that are saying that this is terrible. You should never let anybody transition because this handful of people regretted it and said it was the wrong path. And what we have coming out of that survey is that 98% of people who had gender affirming care said it was a positive thing in their life, that it wasn't, there's those are
Yeah,
very small. And actually, when we look at like regret rates for surgery, there's a lot of concern about that people are going to regret these medical interventions that are irreversible. And the regret rates that we have and across all the data that we have is for surgical interventions is less than 1%. And for if you look at surgical regret across the US for all surgeries combined, it's
yeah.
14,
It's how much?
14%.
Uh-huh.
And if you look at specific surgery, some of them are even higher than that. And we
Yeah.
don't stop offering care because people don't like the outcome of the surgery or that kind of thing. But it's so small in this community. It's not that you don't want to pay attention to people who and help make sure people get access to care if they did find out that either their gender evolved to another place or they found out it was not the right thing for them. They should be getting access to care. And it shouldn't mean that we stop offering care to everybody else, the 98% or the 99% who need it, who it does work well for, because the 1 to 3% had a problem with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me ask you about one of the hot button issues right now, which is around athletics and the idea that, and I've not looked into it at all, so I'm just going from, what's in the media.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but somebody who is competing as a female and who has purportedly has all the hormones and so on naturally of a male, being having superior strength, etc., associated with being a male. what are your impressions about that?
Well,
And do you have a position on
yeah,
that
I have
issue?
a position. I what I notice is that when transgender people are allowed to be in stuff until they start winning. And if they win something, then somehow they had an advantage that was because of their transgender status. And most trans folks in athletics are not the top athletes or the stars in that way. At the same time, there are things to think about around this. A lot of the laws that are happening across the country are happening for youth. And when you talk about youth who have really not gone through a puberty or gone through a very minimal puberty and they've blocked that and they're going through the other puberty, their bodies aren't any different than their cisgender peers as far as their strength and their abilities and all that kind of stuff. What we're
Uh-huh.
concerned about is somebody who's been an extreme athlete. You know, we're looking at Caitlyn Jenner, who was an extreme athlete as Bruce Jenner for a very, very long time. And then going off of hormones or going off of testosterone and onto estrogen did weaken her, but she also has the muscle development that's there. So there's something to look at in that framework. All the same,
Yeah.
most transgender people after a period of years, and this has been studied by the medical providers. Now I have to say I'm not an expert in all of the athletic stuff, but I would say what I've learned is that after a period of 2 to 4 years, something in that range, that cisgender women and transgender women are on par with each other around their musculature, their abilities, and that kind of stuff. And so they're not. One difference might be stature, bigger bones.
Mhm.
But I also know women who are on, like the UC Berkeley basketball team are huge. They're extraordinarily tall. They're big, big women, and they would, you know, be right in line with a transgender woman who's in that space as well. So after a period of time, this is what when they started looking at it in the Olympics, they realized that after a period of time, there is no advantage to that.
Ah,
And yet, there's another thing to think about, and that is that we all have different physical advantages and disadvantages based on our own genetics and all kinds of other stuff. So if you look at people, I think it was Michael Phelps who had basically webbed fingers, and so
oh yeah.
he had a
Right.
physical advantage in the pool. They didn't tell him he couldn't compete because he had a physical advantage, right? But was an advantage. It made him a winner in a lot of ways, and he
Yeah.
was able to be faster than other people just because of the way his body was,
Yeah.
you know. And there was those issues around um, the I think it was a Kenyan runner in the Olympics who they found out was intersex and had a little higher level of testosterone and decided it was unfair. Um, that. But this is somebody who's not trans, right? Um,
Yeah.
and we have this issue that I really think when it comes to athletics that maybe we should be focusing more on the bodies that are there, and kind of like you have weight classes and things like that, um, and focusing on some of that stuff because I know some pretty awfully strong cisgender women who I think it's unfair to women too to say that they're so that that they actually can't compete on those levels. We've had a lot of those gender wars over the years and shown that women can actually compete in certain areas. All the same, um, when we're talking about kids, it's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not what we're
Well,
talking.
yeah, yeah. I really appreciate the way you've presented a picture that's more complex than we would tend to, than it would than it's been positioned generally
Well, and if you
in the
look at trans
news.
girls, and we're not worried about so much about trans boys. I mean, in Texas, they had this rule that you had to compete based on your assigned sex. So they had a trans boy who was on testosterone. He was winning he was a wrestler. He was winning all of women's wrestling all through high school. He won everything because he had an advantage, and they wouldn't let him compete with boys, which is what he wanted to do, right?
Ah,
Uh, they, like
yeah,
they shot themselves in the foot with that one when it comes to that. But if you look at
yeah,
kids and where they are developmentally, and the level of physical strength and things that they have. And you look at trans girls who want to compete, who, transitioned young, in like say early puberty and that kind of stuff. They are, and most trans girls actually are not into athletics, but those that are don't tend to be your super buff boys that then become girls. That's not how it usually works. And so when you look at those kids, you see they're no different. They're right on par. And a lot of our athletics, even young athletics, is co-ed, right?
Yeah.
And a particular time where it feels like it's not fair. Um, so
Well, we are living in a very complex world, and you have definitely helped us to understand uh, some of that complexity. And I think it's wonderful work that you're doing, and really encourage you to keep it up. Is there anything that we haven't touched on here? I don't want you to feel shortchanged. And darn, I wish we had got into blank there.
we covered a lot of territory actually. I guess what I would say is that in just speaking to the various pieces of things that I'm doing,
Yeah.
um, when it comes to training, I offer a lot of free stuff out there. So I would say if you don't know anything about that, there's access to stuff so you can start learning about what the standards of care are and working with families and various things like that. And you can get CEs too as well. I also do a lot of deeper dive workshops. So the deep dive workshops are really hands-on experiential learning how to work through stuff on both gender health evaluations and writing letters, unpacking gender, a lot of other things that I'll be offering coming up. But the Trans Family Alliance is one I'd really love to talk a little bit about, which is that parent support community. And it's actually an educational community more than a support. We have support, we have live meetings, but there's hundreds of hours of educational videos for parents for them to learn and figure out their way along their own gender journey. And I think as clinicians out there, it's really important to know that there's a resource out there that can really support your work with the families you work with, especially if you tend to be more of a child therapist and you want to work with the kid and you're not sure you know how to bring the parents in, or you only do collateral work. It's really important that they get connected. And we know that parents do so much better when they have the support of other parents who have been on the journey with them. And I also know that parents will balk against that initially. But understanding that's an educational space as well can be really helpful. So I'd like to, like really let people know that that's there. And it's actually an international group, but most of the parents are in the US, and even more so in the West Coast because that's where I started it. So, but
So
it is.
people can find links to this on your website, right?
Yeah, if they go to, I mean, the Gender Health Training Institute.com is one, and transfamilyalliance.com is another. My other Quest Family Therapy is my practice, which is very California centric, but the rest of it is national and international. So, and also
Okay.
a coaching program for folks who really want to get into. I mean, that's part of the fun of what I ended up creating at the Gender Health Training Institute was not only courses and workshops, but for people who really want to learn this stuff and do, kind of move on their skill set, particularly at the intersection of family and gender, is the coaching and mentorship program that's there. So that's a lot of fun as well. It's available.
Okay. So to find, is there sort of one place where they can get find they can start their journey into all of this information?
I would say, as clinicians, go to the Gender Health Training Institute and you'll see something. There's a link there for parents that'll take you to the Trans Family Alliance. If you go to the Trans Family Alliance, there's a link for professionals that'll take you back to the Gender Health Training Institute. So they coordinate with each other. I'm not sure that my clinical site actually has all of the links there. So that would be.
Okay. Okay. Maybe you can, when we get off the air, you can send me the links that you would want me to have in the show, and then it'll
Yeah.
help me. Then I'll make sure I can do that.
Yeah.
And so, Dr. Shawn, you got to teach me to say your last name again.
Giammattei.
Giammattei. Dr. Shawn Giammattei, thanks for being my guest today on Shrink Rap Radio.
Thanks for asking me. This is fun.